are you?
Hi there, Dr. Russell.
Hi,
Hi
how are
there.
you?
I'm good, thank you. Nice to meet you.
It's very nice to meet you.
And thanks for reaching out to us and asking for us to have this chat on this podcast. Really an honor to sort of catch up with you and find out more about what you do. And yeah.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here and excited to talk with you and maybe get a chance to hear more about what you do as well.
Of course, absolutely. So I was just doing, just before I brought you in, I was just doing a quick introduction. I'm recording the podcast as obviously. It's not going out live as yet. If you want to listen to it back before we put it out live, just let us know. We can certainly send you the link for you to listen back to it.
When do you think it will go live?
So we'll be editing it in the next couple of days. So ideally, we were hoping to put it out by the end of the week. I'm not sure how your schedule looks like.
Okay. Wonderful.
Yeah. So first of all, how did you kind of get in? How did you find out about our service? Were you kind of looking around services in the UK just to see how you can connect with people from over here, or how did that all come about?
Yes, doing some background research. We've actually had two students that we've worked with in the UK, both of whom were at King's College, and would very much like to get the word out about our services and how we might be helpful to students in the UK, and then found you.
Amazing. That is great. So just for our listeners, do you mind just introducing and telling us a bit about yourself and some of the amazing work that you do?
Absolutely. I'm Norrine Russell, and I am the founder and owner of Russell Coaching for Students, which is headquartered in Tampa, Florida, but we actually work with students across the entire world, primarily in the US, but also in the UK and Canada, and some other places as well. And what our practice focuses on is students who are neurologically atypical, so they have ADHD or autism, learning disabilities, possibly a mood disorder, and or giftedness. Those things often go together, so students rarely have just one of them. And we work with them to build their executive functioning skills, their learning and study strategies, and their social and emotional skills. So we work with students anywhere from primary school all the way through college and university students in their 20s. We absolutely love what we do. We think that coaching is often the missing piece in ADHD treatment and often the missing link for students in general who are struggling in school.
Yeah. And if you could just give us an example, just a flavor of some of the work that you do, particularly when you have some of these students that are having difficulties. I think you touched on executive functioning there. So what kind of things would that involve in terms of the coaching? So if you are working with someone, just to give them an idea of what to expect.
Sure, absolutely. So a typical client for us might be a client who is transitioning into middle school or transitioning into high school. So in the US, high school is grades 9 through 12. And so should we begin working with a student who's starting high school, the first step in our practice is establishing a relationship with that student, because we all know that the relationship is what's most essential. And then we do a few different assessments with the student. We take a look at what their strengths are, which is very important, especially given a coaching framework. We take a look at what their strengths and weaknesses are when it comes to executive functioning skills. And then we also administer an assessment designed to help us understand their learning and study strategies. So first is relationship building. Second is assessment. Third, we begin to teach them our method of project management for school. And then they would generally meet once or twice weekly with their coach. And we basically start from where that student is at. If they're having trouble with time management, we'll focus on that. If they're having trouble with organization, if they're having trouble decoding directions for assignments, we'll do that. And our practice and the way our coaches work is very holistic. So we've just in the last year designed customized software to support our coaching process, which is called connected coaching. And so when the students come each week, they check on their goals from the week before, they set weekly goals for the upcoming week, they enter all of the grades for their courses, and then they make plans to actually get their assignments or their papers or their tasks done. And throughout the process of doing that, we work on building all of their executive functioning skills, controlling impulsivity, getting started on things, finishing things we don't like to do, as well as how to prepare for tests better and take tests better.
What is the age limit that you work with the youngest?
Anywhere really from primary school, so age 6, all the way up through young adults in their 20s.
So particularly for that young age group there, are you working directly with the young person? Are you working with the parents and schools instead, or?
Yes, so the very little ones, it's a combination of working with parents and the student. And then by the time we get to age 10 or 11, when students begin to be expected to have a little bit more independence and autonomy when it comes to completing school assignments, and their parents are ready for them to have that as well, then we would be working sort of directly with the student. But the parents are an important part of the team, no matter what the age of the student is. We are strong proponents of a team approach to any of these conditions, whether it's ADHD, autism, a mood disorder. And so parents get pretty thorough notes after each session. They know what the goals are for the week. They know what we're working on, and they get some training in how they can be supportive for their student without turning into that parent nag.
Of course, yeah. And typically, how many sessions would you say you would offer a young person?
So what we have found in 14 years of experience is that for most students, it takes about a term. So about 3 to 4 months for the intervention, for them to really build these new skills, to be able to get motivated to do their assignments, to turn their assignments in, to read rubrics, follow directions, balance all the competing priorities. We do have students who stay with us longer because, as you know, so many students with ADHD are just a little bit developmentally delayed. And so even as they learn these skills, they're being challenged more and more in school. And so we do have some students who stay with us long term to get the kind of coaching support they need so that they can be successful, because they're often very bright and certainly very capable of being successful in school. It's just that they also have ADHD or some other atypical condition.
Yeah, and certainly when it comes to some of the issues that some young people I come across go through, like exam preparation, revision, particularly now in the UK, most of our students, they're preparing for their exam finals, and you tend to get a lot of our referral rates pick up usually around about this time of the year, just particularly for new young people being put forward for ADHD, and certainly for the ones that are reaching out to want to get some support in terms of study skill revision. In some cases, parents would be kind of looking at trialing medication for some of these young people. So it just from what you've seen, like in this, I don't know, how long have you worked in this field now, just particularly in the ADHD field?
Pardon?
How long have you worked in this field now? How long has it been?
About 11 years.
Oh, wow. So, yeah.
So,
yeah.
My background is in psychology. I have a PhD in psychology with a focus in developmental psychology and education. And then I taught at the university level for several years. Then I worked in nonprofit for several years, and then actually started the coaching practice about 14 years ago, and very quickly saw that there was just an enormous need for ADHD coaching, and tried to learn everything I could about what the best practices were, how coaching can integrate with, medication treatment and having a good school plan. And so, yeah, it's been a while. I think probably in the United States, we are probably the largest student coaching practice, for sure the largest student coaching practice that focuses on kids who are atypical.
And again, for our listeners, what's the name of your practice?
Russell Coaching for Students, and the website is russellcoaching.com.
Right. Okay. Amazing. And there was an ADHD conference last year. It's obviously happened every year. I came to it. That was in Dallas, Texas, the one last year. I met a lot of coaches there. There was quite a number of people from ADCAR, and the Chad was there, Ada. Have you been to one of those conferences, the ADHD conference?
I have not. I do have two children who have ADHD and have
Right.
considered going as a parent, but I haven't. I've done a lot of self-study. And again, because my background is in developmental psychology, which is focused on, all of the positive side of psychology and building resiliency, that's really the model that I've used to build the practice. I think that we're also unique as a practice in that we've developed a specific model and a specific software to support that model, which I think really is pretty innovative in the field.
Amazing. I was just going to ask you about your practice, actually. Do you want to tell us a bit more about your practice in terms of how many coaches you work with? And I think you said you're based in Tampa, Florida. Is that the only location you have, or do you have other locations?
Well, we're headquartered in Florida, but our coaches work by Zoom with students across the world. So because we started here in the US, the majority of our students are here in the US, but currently we do have students in Canada and in the UK. And so we have 23 coaches, all of whom are at least mid-career professionals. So these are people who have 8 to 10 years of experience already working in education or counseling or school psychology. And then they go through very rigorous training with me. And between those 23 coaches, we see about 150 students a week, again, with students anywhere in the world, implementing our method of connected coaching and using our customized software.
Amazing. That's really great. 150 students a week. That's that's a lot.
It's a lot, but you know as well as I do that it is just the tip of the iceberg. Most parents, when they find us, say, I had no idea something like this existed. I didn't know that there was ADHD coaching for students. And we have been, in therapy, or he has been on meds, but there's still some piece of this treatment plan that's missing. And it's the actual building of the executive functioning skills and the learning and study strategies and the social and emotional skills that sometimes students can be delayed in. And so I think most parents have no idea that a service like this is out there and available. We're very familiar, I think, with the idea of ADHD coaching for adults, but less so with ADHD coaching for students. And with us, we start as young as age 10 or 11.
Yeah. So it's not just certainly to do with academic studying. It kind of branches off from, because you mentioned about the social aspects of their ADHD. You try and help them with that as well, and the emotional side of things.
Yeah. We know that kids with ADHD, and I do, and probably most of your listeners know that for some kids with ADHD, social relationships can be so challenging, or managing their own emotions can be challenging, in the sense of they can be explosive. They can have, trouble coping with transitions. They can have trouble with their peers at different ages for different reasons. And so, yes, we are definitely, our primary focus is on academic success, but you can never do that without also paying attention to life skills in general, right? How do you get along with people? How do you make sure that your self-esteem stays intact? How do you set goals, right? When do you compromise? How do you communicate? So all of those things are individually addressed with the student as they need them. So we are not a program that says you're going to learn these 10 things. We start with assessment, and then for each individual student, we work on what's important to them and to their parents and what they need to be successful, in life, at home, and at school.
Yeah. And what are some of the things that you find students tend to come, what are the common things that they usually come to you asking for help with?
I think one of the most important areas is motivation, right? So it's finding the motivation, it's keeping the motivation, and then it's finishing work. And so many of our students are frustrated or exhausted by their school day, right? They come home, they don't necessarily want to begin working on papers or exam preparation. And so sometimes they begin to practice some avoidance coping. Sometimes they begin to sort of shut it out. Often this can lead to dishonesty between the student and the parent because the student doesn't want to deal with it because they don't really feel competent at it. And so I think motivation is key in all of our coaching relationships. And so for us, we try to start with, let's get some small wins. Let's get some small assignments done. Let's get things figured out, what you need to do. Let's break it down. Let's make it seem less overwhelming. Let's celebrate everything that you can get done. And then slowly over the course of the term, get to the point where you do feel as a student that you can actually get this done, that you have the ability to study, to write the 10-page paper, to get the things in on time. And that's just, it's an ongoing process that takes some time because often our students with ADHD have sort of gotten the message, whether that's externally or from their own selves, that they can't do this. I can't do it. I can't do it. I can't do it. They sometimes are getting a lot of zeros on assignments, 50%. And so we have to build that back up, starting at the ground level and, help them see, yes, I can get this small assignment done. Yes, I can get this daily homework done. Yes, I can study for this quiz, and begin to build back the self-esteem and the feeling of competency that often students with ADHD are lacking, sadly.
Yeah. I hear this quite a lot. When you say motivation, that's something that often comes up. It's the getting started on tasks and sticking with tasks and seeing them through, and that sense of feeling overwhelmed, which can then affect their self-esteem. Feel like they can't. So in some cases they have got the capability. It's just something feels like it's holding them back.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. I think, and I talk with parents about this a lot. We say they have the potential or they have the capability, but we really need to tighten up our language there, right? What we mean is they have the intellectual or the cognitive capacity, but where they might be lacking capacity is in their executive functioning skills, their learning and study strategies. So for sure, are they bright enough? Yes, they are bright enough, right? But they are still lagging in skill development. And that's where we need to come in and teach them those skills and practice those skills and really ingrain those skills as behaviors, right? Because that's frustrating as a parent to think, oh, my child is bright, my child is capable of doing well in school. Well, they are and they aren't.
I think you're right there. I think it's the use of the language. I never thought that until you mentioned it there, and how you just phrased it, which sort of makes sense. I think the use of the language that the young person is hearing us using this language, it's it's about, as we know with ADHD, it's not like they haven't got the Russell Barkley described it as, it's not a disorder of like not knowing what they're meant to be doing, it's the doing what they already know. It's that, the application of what's in there onto paper, in this case. And just in terms of your coaching, and if you compare it, because there's a lot of coaching that goes on out there that we come across, and I've spoken to lots of coaches. From your experience, and if you compare with your coaching, which is more specific to students, and the traditional coaching, which is focused on just the general ADHD, would you say, what are the differences there?
That's an interesting question, and one I haven't been asked before. So I think that, we really start with the idea of academic coaching, and our academic coaching is for students who have ADHD, who have, other neurological, developmental conditions. But while we are focused on helping people with those core symptoms of ADHD, we're really focused on teaching the skills and the strategies that will help scaffold the students' development as they go through school. So, I think for adults who are doing ADHD coaching, they're kind of looking for, how do they get their lives back in order? How do they stop setting goals but not following through? How do they, cope with their ADHD at work? I think for us, because we are primarily focused on how do we be successful at school in an academic setting, there is more of a close focus on school, but and I know that nothing happens, in isolation. So students might be struggling at school and also feeling very isolated at school. Students might be struggling at school and their parents might be getting divorced. And so, there is this holistic relational component to our method of connected coaching. I don't know if I can really compare it to sort of typical ADHD coaching, because as the field of coaching is really it's unregulated. And so there are a lot of people out there who are coaches who are, doing what they think is helpful. There are a lot of people out there who have ADHD who think therefore they'll be a great ADHD coach. And so I'm not even sure, to be honest with you, if there's a commonly agreed upon idea of what ADHD coaching is. I think coaching in general is working on goals, right? Like two people collaborating and partnering to work on goals and take the coachee's life to the next level. And I would say that's definitely true for our method of connected coaching. But it seems to me there must be hundreds of different ways that people are doing ADHD coaching right now, simply because there's really not an agreed upon method in the field.
Yeah, you're right. And just in terms of measuring the effectiveness of your work with the young person, do you use rating scales? Is it more of just tracking their goals and measuring to see how they're getting on with the goals, or what's your kind of evaluation on kind of to get some feedback on progress?
So we look at 3 areas in terms of seeing how the student is doing. One for sure is their weekly goals and their term goals. Are they meeting those weekly goals? Because if they are, it means they have the skills to be doing so, right? That they have stopped procrastinating, or they have started to study, or they have, stopped relying on the course time in the course before when they're going to have a test to study. So yes, the first one is goals. The second is grades. And if the student is really achieving a level of academic success that's more commensurate with their intellectual and cognitive ability, right? Because what we often see is underachievement for kids with ADHD. And third, and I think possibly most important to most of us at the practice, is we are also always carefully, closely looking at family conflict and family relationships, because there are a lot of families that come to us where parents don't really understand ADHD. They're frustrated. They're like, he's a good kid. He's a smart kid. I don't understand why he's not, turning his homework in. He's a good kid. He's a smart kid. I don't understand why he has 3 Fs, And so, especially in the teen years and the young adult years, there can be so much tension in the family over this, gap, right, between what the student is capable of, from an intellectual or from the student wants to do well, right, and what they're actually doing. And so our third outcome that we're always looking at is, do parents get to exhale? Does the relationship go back to being positive and pleasant and connected, as opposed to the parent constantly being, are you ready for your term, exams? Are you ready for your papers that are due? Which is what happens in a lot of families, is the parent becomes the executive functioning person. And then eventually all kinds of conflict bubbles up from that, because nobody really likes to be told what to do. And adolescents and young adults are not, an exception to that role.
And with schools particularly, do you work directly with schools at all?
I do a lot of training at schools and with teachers, but primarily we work with our students, our clients at the time, which again, we see about 150 students a week, and their school, to help make sure that the plan is in place that's needed for that student, right? So in the United States, those are called 504 or IEP plans. Across the world, they're known as lots of different things: student support plans, disability plans, lots of different words for the same thing. But it's basically, what are the accommodations and services that a student is supposed to be getting at school? And so we work with schools individually on behalf of our students to make sure that their plan is appropriate for them, that they are getting those accommodations, and helping the student to reach out to advocate for what they need, and to build relationships with their teachers.
Yeah. It's a bit of a collaboration, isn't it? Because the bit that the young person, student, their part that they play, and then obviously the environment that they're in, be it in a school setting or at home, to be able to help them address some of these issues that they go through. Do you screen, or do you kind of do an assessment initially first before you decide whether a student is, what do you want to call it, is suited enough for your coaching?
Right. We do have some initial phone calls and conversations with parents to answer their questions and to hear about their student. And then our official process starts with an intake, probably very similar to what you do at your practice, in terms of getting a history of the student, a brief medical history, a complete educational history, reading any psychoeducational evaluations that have been done, reviewing school plans. And so it's a very thorough intake that starts the process. And that, for students aged, 18 and under, is with the parents. And for students who are over 18, they're part of that process as well, although the parents are often still involved. And then the next step in our process is doing the assessments, which we break up over a couple of different sessions, so that we can really change the conversation from, oh, the student is unmotivated, or they don't care, they're not trying hard enough, or, well, if they just did their homework, right, to figuring out, well, what are the lagging skills that the student needs, and how can we build those? And so, yes, I would say we're very open to working with just about any kind of student. Most of our students are bright. They have been high achieving in school, and they've kind of hit a wall, where, whether it's middle school, whether it's high school, whether it's university, they have reached the point where they don't have the skills they need, either the executive functioning skills or the coping skills that they need, to really be as successful as they want to be. So I think there have been a couple of times where we have referred students for mental health services first, particularly if the anxiety or depression is so severe that the student is, refusing to attend school, unable to participate in school. And what we'll say to that family is, mental health absolutely needs to be a priority over academics. So let's put that first on the agenda and then come back and see us for coaching.
I was literally just about to ask you in terms of like referring on to other services, appropriate services, if you feel the young person would benefit from, for example, mental health support there. So your team is purely based on it's just formed of coaches.
Yes.
And certainly from yourself, you've got your psychology background, so you've got experience of kind of offering interventions such as CBT and
well, we do not offer clinical services. So we're very clear that we offer coaching services. And if a student needs clinical mental health services, we refer. We frequently are the team lead in bringing all those things together. So a student might come to us and they have a therapist or they have a counselor. We'll reach out to them and introduce ourselves and explain what we're doing and have a good understanding of what the therapeutic goals are. And then also inform the counselor on what are the students' goals in coaching so that the processes can intersect in the best way possible. I mean, you don't want too many cooks in the kitchen, but you do want there to be forward momentum from all members of the team, right? And we've always found, whether it's therapist, a counselor, psychologist, psychiatrist, that people are thrilled to hear from us and have a team approach to helping students. Because as well as I do, everyone in the mental health field is overwhelmed, overworked. And so for us, we really believe that that's an important component of ADHD treatment, to be working as a team. And so we will take the lead in reaching out to the counselor or the therapist, or to referring to a counselor or therapist, sending notes to a psychiatrist or a psychologist. It is, a lot of people talk about the importance of team, but we really practice it. And that's something I'm proud of with our practice.
It sounds great, yeah. And some of the coaches I've come across in the UK, some of them have an education background. They used to work in special educational needs schools, and then changed career, gone into kind of the coaching route. Do some of your coaches have an educational background?
Yes, so everyone has 8 to 10 years of experience working with students in some capacity. So that might be as a classroom teacher, it might be as a special education teacher, it might be at a school that is designed specifically for students with learning differences. They might have been a school counselor, working in school psychology, but we don't hire anyone who doesn't have at minimum 8 to 10 years of experience working with students. And then we put them through our own training process, because a lot of life coaching training is not going to be applicable to adolescents who have, complex atypical neurology, right? Typical life coaching is not going to help you understand, what does autism look like? What does the combination of autism and ADHD look like, right? And so our coaches go through a lengthy training process with us, and then very close supervision, so that they always have the support they need. Because again, you're working with complex kids with multiple diagnoses, and you're working with multiple members of the team. And so our philosophy has just always been 2 heads are better than 1. And so, that's primarily what I spend my time doing at the practice is, of course, running the practice from the business point of view, but it's really supporting the coaches, being the person they can bounce ideas off of, being the person they can come to with frustration around school or parents, and that's really important. The work we do is as intense as mental health work in a lot of ways.
Yeah. I know you've got a few publications that you put out. You've got there's a book I came across. Is it Asking the Right Questions About ADHD?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that? Because there's a talk that you did on YouTube. I saw a clip of that. I think you were talking at some conference, and they introduced you and they mentioned about that book. Do you wanna? Because I haven't read the book myself, but it sounds like an interesting book for parents, particularly, certainly when it comes to when you are. I don't want to put the words in your mouth, but when you're about to go for an assessment for ADHD, there's so many things that might be going through your mind, and you don't know where to start and how to ask certain questions. So, do you want to give us a bit of a flavor of what to expect in that book, particularly, and maybe mention about any other publications you have?
Sure, absolutely. I'd love to. So, my experience as the parent of two complex kids was that nobody gave me the manual, right? There was no handbook that got handed to me along with diagnosis after diagnosis after diagnosis. And there was certainly no handbook of, okay, here's your child and their multiple diagnoses. And so that was frustrating. I knew that if I had a child who had a broken bone, or a child who had an eye disease or heart disease, we would be getting much more direction from the medical community, right? But, these things are different. They just really are. And because they often occur in tandem with each other, you end up with a lot of very unique kids. So my experience as a parent was I had to learn an awful lot in order to understand what my kids needed at school, what my kids needed in terms of treatment, what my kids needed in terms of parenting. And so I had to learn how to ask a lot of questions, and I didn't know the right questions to ask at first, right? We don't know what we don't know. And then in the last 14 years or so of running the practice, I think one of the strongest aspects of our practice is that we are such advocates for kids, and we will say to parents, these are a couple of questions that would be good for you to ask at school. These are a couple of questions that would be good for you to ask the psychologist, right? And parents, again, I was lucky to have a background in psychology, so I could kind of figure out what I needed to ask. But there are many parents who are at a complete loss as to what am I supposed to be doing if I think my child might have ADHD? What am I supposed to be doing if I am referred to have an evaluation or an assessment, right? What am I supposed to be doing after that? What am I supposed to be doing when they turn into a teenager? And so the book is a very short, very practical, well-organized book of what are the questions that parents should be asking before the ADHD diagnosis? What are the questions to ask as you're going through the diagnostic process? And then what are the questions to ask after you have a diagnosis? And it's not a complete book about everything you ever wanted to know about ADHD, but it is designed to empower parents to know what should they be asking every member of their child's team. And I think that is the most important thing that we do at the Practice for Parents is to comfort them, make them feel that they're not alone, but also to empower them. I did an intake yesterday and I said, there are a couple of questions that I would suggest that you go back and ask the doctor, and a couple of questions that I would suggest you go back and ask the therapist. And I'm like, oh, we hadn't really thought about that, And so when we know that we need this team approach, it's very hard for parents who are expected to kind of be the team leader to do that role without knowing what it is that they're supposed to be doing. So That's what the book is for, is to help parents understand, how can I be a better advocate for my child? How do I find out what I don't know? We don't know what we don't know.
Great. And is that available on kind of major book selling websites and things like Amazon and
yes.
Oh, right. Okay. And any other publications, any other books you've got out there?
No, I would refer people to our website. We do have a blog on the website where we offer, again, very short articles that are concrete and practical. And so at russellcoaching.com, if you go to our blog, There are dozens of blog entries there that, will talk about time management, organization. Why can't your kid get their shoes on in the morning? Why can't they bring home the papers that they need from school? Why can't they turn in the papers back to the teacher? And then we also have a YouTube channel as well as Instagram, and are constantly posting, again, concrete applied tips to help parents feel less stressed out, and things to try for children and teenagers. So we have the book out, and then we have our blog and the YouTube channel and Instagram. And our Instagram is Russell Coaching LLC, and we'd love to have you follow us.
Oh, well, yeah, I think we are following you already. But yeah, for anyone out there, certainly who wishes to find out more from yourself and your colleagues, can reach out on those platforms. So for your on YouTube, what is the what do they need to search for? What's your the handle?
Well, so we're on YouTube. We are putting up any major presentations that I or other members of the team do. And we are also using it to house any kind of Facebook Live or Instagram Live events that we might do. And eventually we may, we've just started doing classes for parents of kids with ADHD. We actually, in the last class, had a couple from the UK join us. And those classes may eventually become available on the YouTube. And if you're curious to know about any of those resources, probably the easiest thing to do is to go to our main website, russellcoaching.com. And then, you can find our Facebook link, the YouTube link, the Instagram, LinkedIn, all the usual social media. So I would say, make it easy, go to russellcoaching.com, and you'll find our social media all over there.
You mentioned about your children. Both of them got ADHD, do they?
Yes, they do.
And how old are they?
13 and 14.
Okay. So is that a recent diagnosis, or they've had it since they were quite young?
No, my son was diagnosed at 4 and my daughter at 5. It's so interesting, right? As a psychologist, I clearly know a lot of psychologists, kind of hang out in that crowd a little bit. And, there were so many people who said to me about my son, who's my older one, oh, he's just a boy. Oh, he's just very active. Like, nothing's wrong with him. And the whole time I was thinking, I don't know that I think there's anything wrong with him, but there's something different about him for sure. And he's turned out to be my more complex child, who has ADHD, autism, and some mood disorders, and is also gifted. So that's sort of a unique constellation of things. My daughter was diagnosed at 5, and this is a funny story too. Her teacher at the time, when I said, she's going to be out of school for a day or two, she's having an ADHD evaluation done. Teacher literally said to me, and I know she just wasn't thinking, all she was thinking about is, she cares about my daughter. My daughter's a good student. My daughter's doing well in school. But the words that happened to come out of her mouth were, she can't have ADHD. She's so cute.
Right. Okay.
And I was like, yep, I totally hear you. She is adorable and cute and smart and doing well at school. And yes, I do think she has ADHD also. But both of my children, people around me, had some, I think, typical things that we as parents hear, like, oh no, they don't have ADHD, or they're too bright for that, or I don't see it, or whatever. And so those are my kind of two funny stories. My psychologists who were like, no, that's just typical boy behavior. I was like, no, I'm a developmental psychologist. That is not typical boy behavior. And then my daughter's teacher, who just loved her endlessly and was a great teacher, who, I think in her heart, again, came from sort of this stereotype or stigma of ADHD. She didn't want my daughter to have ADHD because she was doing so well and she was so great. And I was like, no, she is doing great, and she's going to do amazing things, and she has ADHD.
Yeah, and I think that's something we discussed in this podcast. Just people's understanding of ADHD and some people how they view ADHD, which is typically is something that tends to be more related to boys for some reason, or they're they have to be very hyperactive and climbing on furnitures and stuff. And the other things that we touched on today, like the executive function, tend not to be highlighted a lot by a lot of people. So, or if someone is more on the inattentive side of the ADHD, not really showing the outward hyperactivity, that might be then misinterpreted as, no, you can't have ADHD. It's definitely like, I think you're overanalyzing the situation. So yeah, hence why we're doing this podcast is, we've discussed so many things on this platform, just trying to educate people and make them realize that you could be as gifted and academically bright and successful in your life and have ADHD on top of that.
Yeah. There are no generalizations that can be made. There are kids with ADHD who end up doing very well in school and in life and have great social and emotional skills. And then there are kids with ADHD who end up really struggling in school and in life. And, I think that we shortchange students when we make any kind of assumptions. I think that for me is one of the things I love about coaching is we get to work individually, one-on-one with students, get to know what their strengths are and what they need to grow and develop, because there are no generalizations to be made about people with ADHD. One of the things I love that Russell Barkley says, is that he thinks eventually, 10 or 15 years from now, this will be known as executive functioning disorder, because that's really where the core deficits are. And I'll be curious to see what happens. But I think the whole diagnostic label of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder has not been a super helpful one in the field or for parents.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. Yeah, we've discussed this topic a lot, and even with Russell, because we had him as a guest on this platform as well, and we were discussing that, and the term ADHD it's come a long way, compared to other terms that this condition used to be called, as like back in the 1800s, and I think it's come a long way, and we are where we are. But it's not helping in terms of the awareness that we want to raise, and for people to, and I don't think we are getting to the core of the people that actually need the support that they need. So many times I've been to schools and you go to observe another young person and you can clearly see other 4 or 5 other students that clearly would benefit from also being assessed, and they haven't really been put forward for it. So, and to get, some of the comments you were saying there, that you can't be ADHD if you're bright or if you're gifted or if you're cute in your child's case. That's still that perception that the public have when it comes to ADHD. So I admire anyone that works in this field, certainly for you as a parent, and then having the passion to dedicate yourself to setting up what you set up and helping students. It sounds like it's, which then leads me to, I was going to ask you about any success stories that you might want to share with us.
One that's particularly close to my heart right now is I have a student I worked with all through high school. So that's grades 9 through 12 here in the US. And he was referred to our practice by his therapist because he had such terrible anxiety that he would actually develop these enormous hives all over his body when it was exam time. And his therapist had worked with him for most of the first year of high school. And, this student was so bright, so kind, so hardworking, so responsible, but his anxiety was just through the roof. And so together with his therapist, we also referred him for psychiatric and medication services. And then where he really needed some help was in some of the learning and study strategies. Like writing was just absolutely torture for him. He couldn't get a sentence out in 9th grade, and we worked together all the way through his graduation from an IB high school program here. And it's an incredibly rigorous program, the IB program in the US. And he really, by the time we got to 12th grade, had his whole system down. He'd have his whiteboard of what needed to get done today, tomorrow, and the next day. He was making A's in all of his courses. He was asking for help when he needed to. And then this past fall, went off to the University of Florida, which your listeners might not know much about, but is really a very highly ranked academic institution here in the US. And he worked with me and kind of met with me a little bit about every other week this fall, just to make sure that he was going to make the transition successfully. Because we know, right, half of our kids with ADHD do not make the college transition successfully. So he and his parents wanted to make sure that he was going to be successful. And he was really able to wrap up services after his fall term. He had all A's. He's thriving at school. The anxiety is under control. He's so happy at University of Florida, and is going to the Gators football games. And that is just really rewarding to me, because that is such a classic example of a student whose skills are a little bit delayed, who needs support for, kind of a lengthy period, but who ultimately are so capable on every level, intellectually, motivationally, from a responsibility, from a drive point of view. And so, Matthew will always just have a very special place in my heart, because he wanted so much to do well and worked so hard to build these executive functioning and study skills that he didn't have. And he's a success story, and he feels great about himself. And isn't that what we want for all of our kids?
Yeah, exactly. So it definitely sounds like a really good outcome there. And I wonder how he's getting on now in whatever he's doing. And
well, he's still a first year college student, so he's in second term, and doing great. And his mom and I text every couple of weeks, and I'll be like, how's Matthew doing? And so I imagine I'll be able to keep in touch with him through college, and see him graduate and move on. He's in the computer science field, so he'll do some kind of programming. I don't know what it'll be, but that is the student who could have fallen through the cracks, and a student who could have been written off as, well, he's bright, he's not trying hard enough, or it's not our problem at school because it's all anxiety based, or, well, any number of other, not my problem. And he just is such a great human being, and is going to be, and has been already, wildly successful.
Yeah. And another thing that we discussed again on this podcast was about just how schools are not really set up for some students with ADHD. They're not ADHD friendly, to be honest. That the curriculum itself, the amount of time, the lessons that they're expected to sit down for 55 minutes to an hour, and the actual length of the school day itself, and all of that. And I think,
and the lack of physical activity and outside time and exercise, right? I mean, that is a huge part of the problem.
Yeah, no, I agree. And just to think that, they haven't really adapted it over the years, despite the all of these talk around children that have diverse issues such as ADHD, dyslexia, and it's still, and they expect some of these students to fit into the whole, as if like any other students that haven't got some of these difficulties, which amazes me, really, to think that. Hence why what I find eventually, when they move to college and they start to decide what they want to do in the future, you tend to find that they can go down that path that they feel, one, they're not having to do many lessons, and two, they're not in lessons as much as before. Particularly in the UK, the college days, they're not as long, and sometimes they don't have to go every day. And you find that their life becomes a little bit much more easier in that age as they're getting older. But certainly, the kind of primary school, which is like the early years in the UK and leading up all the way to kind of grade 12 from in the US, it's pretty much quite challenging, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. And I think in the US, our systems and the teachers and administrators are pretty tolerant, during those grammar school years, the primary school years. But then where we start to see, it's no longer, well, I'm going to help, I'm going to give him a break, I'm going to let him stand in the back of the classroom. When we hit grade 6, which is middle school here in the US, all of a sudden the conversation changes a lot from what help does this student need to, well, they're not motivated, they're not doing their homework, they don't care about school if they just tried harder. And so there's really a mindset shift that happens as students enter puberty, which is a terrible time to have, the idea that the student just doesn't care or is unmotivated because they're struggling with puberty and ADHD at the same time. And so I hope that teacher training and administrator training will grow and develop over the next 10 to 20 years so that we have a more, neuropsychological understanding of ADHD and less of this idea that it's a behavior problem, which it's not.